Hi everyone, I'm Daniel Tarpey. I'm a PhD student in philosophy at Sofia University in Bulgaria, though I'm currently in Taiwan. My topic for today's virtual conference is Meaning in the Material World. Why not all that matters is matter. The notion of an immaterial or non-physical domain existing in tandem with the physical world, and as equally fundamental if not more so, is a view that has deep roots in philosophy. Plato, possibly one of the first philosophers to formulate such a framework, imagined two worlds, one of the material and the other of the intelligible. The material world, or the world of becoming, was an imperfect copy or shadow of the more real intelligible world, or the world of being, a world populated by ideal forms in the way the physical world is populated by objects. This view provided by Plato laid the bedrock for dualism, which is later more precisely formulated by Descartes. Cartesian or substance dualism treats mind as existing independently from matter, and existence as comprising an immaterial domain distinct from the material world. In modern science, and to some extent in philosophy as well, there has been an ongoing attempt to get away from dualism. On one hand, because dualism fails to give account for how two distinct substances can interact with and act back upon each other, and on the other hand, because science couldn't account for the immaterial. As the empirical sciences, which knew nothing of inner experience and consciousness, grew in stature, eclipsing other more experiential forms of inquiry, materialism began to take hold as the mainstream scientific worldview. Materialism has its origins in ancient Greece, but experienced a revival in the 17th century with the development of modern science. But one must point out that most of these Enlightenment materialists were themselves theists and often believed in such ideas as the immortality of the soul. Materialism was formulated to describe the material world and intentionally left aside the study of consciousness and conscious experience. It was never meant to account for consciousness, nor to become a totalizing metaphysic. Not until Darwin's The Origin of Species did materialism take on the form as we understand it today. To a strict materialist, everything that exists is physical, or can be reduced to physical components and processes. Nothing immaterial can be said to have any fundamental existence. But the edifice of materialism was never nearly as solid as materialists might like to think, given its glaring inability to account for ordinary conscious experience. And with the rise of quantum science and information technology came the empirical impetus for return to a more idealistic conception of the universe. This idealistic conception of the universe, which we'll discuss later on, can be best described by Wheeler's participatory universe, emerging from an interplay of consciousness and physical reality, the subjective and the objective realms. Materialism has grown increasingly untenable, both in the face of personal experience and rational and empirical developments in science and philosophy. In their 2010 book, The Waning of Materialism, philosopher professors Robert Koons and George Wheeler bring together 23 philosophers to build a sustained and cumulative case against all current versions of materialism. To quote from their book, "As far as I can see, materialism is a view that has no very compelling argument in its favor, and that is confronted with very powerful objections to which nothing even approaching adequate response has been offered. Materialism has come this far because it has embedded itself into the scientific establishment and counts scientists as its most vocal adherents. But it is not the scientific view that it claimed itself to be. Nor is there even a preponderance of scientists holding entrenched materialist views. Materialist scientists are quick to affirm that a belief in God is incompatible with science. But yet, a 2009 Pew survey found a staggering 51% of scientists believing in God or a higher power. Outside the West, that number likely increases, and while the number of scientists self-identifying as religious is generally much lower than the general population, half as much according to a Pew survey in 2006, there are some exceptions to that, including in Hong Kong and Taiwan, where religious scientists outnumber the religious and general population by percentage. Materialism is therefore not a scientific position, but rather an a priori metaphysical assumption. For instance, mathematics, which underlies all the sciences, has long been predicated on the notion that immaterial mathematical concepts actually have an existence, which the mathematician discovers. This notion still remains strong in the field of mathematics in the form of mathematical materialism, which confusingly enough is a view that immaterial forms have an objective, real existence, contrasted with the anti-realists who claim that mathematical concepts are simply creations in the mind of a mathematician. Modern science arose out of a dualist understanding of the world. Materialism has served the physical science as well, but it was never meant to become a totalizing metaphysic. Scientific materialism can predict how things will interact and describes these things and their relationships, but it cannot tell us what a thing is, nor what the force is that draws it together, or what it means or feels like to be such a thing. It can tell us nothing about the content of conscious experience, or qualia, the awareness of a self, emotions and thoughts, and the ability to reason, choice, and our ability to perceive and create meaning. Reductionists, as strict materialists must be, look to physics to tell us about fundamental reality. But what does physics have to tell us? The traditional view, referred to as the Copenhagen interpretation, tends to ignore ontology and takes a logical positivist approach in claiming that there is no elementary phenomenon until it is a registered or observed phenomenon. But even its founders, as we will clearly see, clearly lean towards idealism. Max Planck, one of the founding fathers of quantum theory, regarded consciousness as fundamental, and matter as derivative from consciousness. He goes on to say, we cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. Schrödinger, who contributed greatly to the field of quantum science, echoes a similar train of thought. Consciousness, he says, cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental. It cannot be accounted for in terms of anything else. Eugene Wigner, who received the Nobel Prize in 1963 for quantum symmetries, says it similarly again. It will remain remarkable that the very study of the external world led to the conclusion that the content of consciousness is an ultimate reality. This idealistic leaning that strongly runs through quantum science was perhaps best encapsulated by John Wheeler's participatory universe, emerging from the interplay of consciousness and physical reality. In his more nuanced critique of materialism, Adam Frankis, currently professor of astrophysics, makes the claim that the closer you look, the more the materialist position in physics appears to rest on shaky metaphysical ground. He goes on to quote a 2011 poll which asked participants at a quantum theory meeting which interpretation of quantum mechanics they favored, and came away with votes for at least 6 different models. This arbitrariness, he says, of deciding which interpretation to hold completely undermines the strict materialist position. He goes on to say, there can be no appeal to authority of what quantum mechanics says, because quantum mechanics doesn't say much of anything with regard to its own interpretation. Here are some alternative proposals from the fields of quantum science and information technology, including panpsychism, quantum consciousness, and information theory. Panpsychism, the ancient but revised view that the mind or consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, a fundamental feature of the world which exists throughout the universe, has been adopted in differing degrees by a number of scientists across diverse fields, from physicists to neuroscientists, including a theory of proto-consciousness that suggests that stars have some form of consciousness. A quantum theory of consciousness developed by Hameroff and Roger Penrose claims that consciousness is not part of the brain, but rather a program for a quantum computer in the brain, which can persist in the universe even after death. Similar to this is the idea of the biocentric universe, put forth by medical doctor and scientist Robert Lanza, which says that biology or life is central to reality and in fact creates the universe rather than vice versa. It is not existence which creates life, he says, but life that creates time, space, and the cosmos itself. In their book, Information and the Nature of Reality, From Physics to Metaphysics, physicist Paul Davies and theologian Gregerson proposed that mass, energy, and information constitute 3 irreducible, though inseparable aspects of the material world. Integrated information theory suggests that consciousness is identical to a certain kind of information. Digital philosophy proposes that information is more fundamental than matter and energy. Atoms, electrons, and quarks consist ultimately of bits, binary units of information. Something new is on the horizon. I quote here from Mind and Cosmos: "Why the materialist neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false. I believe the defenders of intelligent design deserve our gratitude for challenging a scientific worldview that owes some of the passion displayed by its adherents precisely to the fact that it is thought to liberate us from religion. That worldview is ripe for displacement." While materialism may still hold itself as a dominant scientific and cultural ideology, its hegemony is waning. We are witnessing the birth of a new paradigm, one that is already, wherever we may choose to look, in the process of forming. Materialism, in rejecting the immaterial, has led to a kind of cognitive split. In science and the world at large, we are facing a crisis of reality. We are in need of a new, unified metaphysics, a new ontology that can take both the observable world and inner experience into account. For we are intricately interwoven into the design as both participant and observer, and satisfied only with what can also resonate deeply with our human condition. From the intelligible world of Platonian philosophy to the new sphere of Teilhard's theology, a realm of conscious thought and minds above the biosphere, to the imaginal domain of Jungian psychology, said to have a real existence, to the implicate order of Bohm's quantum physics, which gives rise to the explicate order of the physical world. These all speak of an immaterial domain, a realm corresponding to the material world. I propose the conceptual universe as this immaterial domain, and meaning as its primary constituent. This conceptual universe is intertwined with and analogous to the material world, and locates and relates meaning in the way the material world locates and relates matter. When we apprehend the world, we are confronting neither a purely physical structure nor simply a mental construct, but rather one where a material skeleton is clothed in meaningful flesh. I propose that this immaterial clothing of the world can be described in the word meaning. Meaning has informational, experiential, and existential properties. It means something to see a sunset. In seeing a sunset, I know something, I feel something, I become something, and it means something to know, to feel, to become. Meaning is a fundamental aspect of reality and irreducible to matter. The idea that meaning could be accounted for entirely in physical terms is as implausible as being able to reduce the works of Shakespeare to the molecules of ink and paper it is written on. Meaning does not just exist in the mind, but is also out there in a universe, though in an interplay with consciousness. Meaning is something external. The meaning of Shakespeare's work is bound up in the work itself, which distinguishes it from the meaning, say, intrinsic to a sunset. And yet there is an interplay with consciousness, for Shakespeare's works can mean something to different minds, or to the same mind at different times. We sit at the junction of the material and conceptual universe. These worlds are brought together in the mind, and just how we act upon the physical world, the mind as well is not only the passive perceiver of meaning, but actively creates and projects it as well. While inescapably intertwined together, the conceptual material domains cannot be reduced to each other, but rather coalesce in the mind. Neither idealism or materialism can properly account for the world that has as its features seemingly subjective and objective content, nor is dualism sufficient. Rather, we sit at the junction of the material and conceptual universe, and in the mind, the world of matter and the world of meaning are brought together. I propose that meaning is a fundamental aspect of the universe. I propose that the mind works on meaning the way the body works on matter, and that these three irreducible yet inseparable aspects comprise our world. Thank you.